My name is Calvin Morland. I am 76 years old, and for the past 6 years, I have lived alone in a modest brick house on the outskirts of Canton, Ohio. The house has 3 bedrooms, though only one is used now, and a kitchen that still smells faintly of cinnamon and wood polish, a scent that seems to linger from the days when my wife, Marjorie, used to bake her famous apple pie on Sunday afternoons. The television in the living room hasn't been turned on in weeks. The magazines on the coffee table are years out of date, and the walls are filled with photographs of people I no longer hear from. It's strange, the way a home can go from a place of noise and laughter to a monument of silence. My days pass slowly, predictably. I wake at 6:30 sharp, make oatmeal and black coffee, read the newspaper, what's left of it, and spend the mornings working in the small garden behind the house. It's more weeds than vegetables now, but I still try to keep it tidy. Marjorie used to grow tomatoes and basil. I try to keep the tradition alive, even though most of the time the tomatoes rot before I remember to pick them. In the afternoons, I nap or reread old letters we exchanged in the 1960s, back when she was still living in Michigan with her parents, and I was stationed in San Diego with the Navy. We married in '69, settled in Ohio a year later, and lived together for 44 years until she passed away from pancreatic cancer. She was 71. The illness came fast, as they always do, and left me breathless, not just from grief, but from the speed at which the world had changed around me. One moment I was a husband, the next a man staring into the vast and painful space that follows the loss of a lifetime companion. I have one daughter, Jenna. She is 46, works in real estate, and lives 20 minutes away with her husband Clark and their 2 boys, Owen and Matthew. We were never what you'd call an affectionate family, but we were, for a time, functional. Birthdays were celebrated, holidays were observed, and we exchanged calls at least once a week, even if they rarely stretched beyond 10 minutes. But something shifted after Marjorie's death. At first, Jenna visited regularly, bringing me leftovers and helping me go through boxes of her mother's belongings. We cried together once. I remember, briefly, awkwardly, in the garage, over a box of old Christmas decorations. But after that, her visits grew less frequent. Calls became shorter. Eventually, they stopped altogether unless I initiated them. And even then, the tone had changed. Distracted, hurried, always ending with some version of, "I have to get back to work," or "the boys have practice." I learned to recognize the rhythm of disinterest, the practiced politeness that people use when they speak to someone they've already filed under obligation. Still, I tried to stay connected. I sent the boys birthday cards with checks enclosed. I offered to help when I heard they were looking for a bigger house. I even gave them $30,000 from my savings when Jenna said the down payment on their dream property was just out of reach. She promised it was a loan, but no repayment plan was ever discussed, and I didn't press. I told myself it was a gift. That's what parents do. They help, especially when they have no one left but their child. And besides, what else would I spend it on? But over time, the distance between us widened. Invitations to family events stopped arriving. I found out about Owen's high school graduation through a neighbor, and Matthew's engagement through a post on social media I had to ask a librarian to help me find. They never called to tell me. I wasn't even invited to the wedding. When I asked Jenna why, her voice turned defensive, brittle. "It wasn't intentional, Dad. It was just a small ceremony. You know how things are these days." I didn't, but I said I understood. What else could I say? There's something cruel about outliving your usefulness. You become invisible in your own life, a background object in the memories of those you helped raise. And it's not just the absence of contact. It's the way they treat the idea of you. I began to notice it during the rare moments we did speak. The subtle condescension in her voice when she asked if I was taking my pills, the way she laughed off my stories as rambling, the gentle yet pointed questions about whether it was safe for me to live alone. "I just worry about you, Dad," she'd say. "You know, if something happened and no one found you for days, it would be awful." I didn't argue. I knew what she was implying. I'd heard it enough from other old men at the pharmacy, in the waiting rooms at the clinic. Children planting the idea of assisted living, not out of concern, but convenience. After Marjorie died, I kept the house exactly as it was. Her shoes remained in the hallway closet, her nightgowns folded in the dresser. I didn't move anything. It felt like desecration to do so. But I did put a small lockbox in my bedroom with the documents that mattered: my will, the deed to the house, bank account information, and a list of contacts in case of emergency. I updated it every year. Not because I thought anyone would need it, but because I didn't want to leave a mess behind. Jenna had enough opinions about my life as it was. The least I could do was make my death as tidy as possible. And then came the dinner. It was a Sunday in mid-March. Jenna had invited me to her home, something that hadn't happened in over a year, and said she wanted us to have a real family meal, like in the old days. I took it as a peace offering. I even put on a tie. When I arrived, she was already 3 glasses into a bottle of wine. Clark greeted me politely, but didn't linger. The boys weren't there. "They're out," Jenna said, waving her hand. "They're always out." We sat down to eat. Roast chicken, potatoes, something green and tasteless. And for the first 20 minutes, the conversation was normal. She asked about my health. I asked about work. She mentioned that the market was cooling, that they were considering refinancing the mortgage. And then, halfway through her 4th glass, she leaned back in her chair, laughed a little too loudly, and said the words I still can't forget. "You know, Dad," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "you're worth more dead than alive. That insurance policy you keep renewing could actually save us. Just saying." She laughed. Clark chuckled, barely. I didn't. I stared at her, trying to find a trace of the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, the one who cried when her hamster died and slept with the nightlight on until she was 11. But all I saw was a stranger with my daughter's face, slurring her words and making jokes about my death, as if I were already halfway there. I didn't finish dinner. I thanked them for the meal and left before dessert was served. No one stopped me. No one called to check if I got home safe. No one even asked why I was leaving early. That was the night something inside me changed, something final. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off and thought about what she had said, about what it meant, about whether it was a joke or the truth disguised as one. And the more I thought, the more I realized it didn't matter. A daughter who can say such a thing, even in jest, is not a daughter who sees her father as a person. She sees a body, an asset, an inconvenience. And I was tired, so tired of being an inconvenience. That night I began to plan, not for revenge, not yet, but for clarity, for freedom, for control, and maybe, just maybe, for a little peace. The morning after that dinner, I awoke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, far from it, but a focused, hard-edged awareness. As if the fog I'd been living in since Marjorie's death had finally begun to lift, and I was seeing my life for what it had truly become. It wasn't just Jenna's words that stung, though they echoed in my head like a cruel nursery rhyme. "You're worth more dead than alive." It was the certainty in her tone, the easy comfort with which she had said it, as if she had rehearsed the phrase, toyed with it in her mind long before she ever allowed it to leave her mouth. A truth disguised as a joke, like so many bitter things people say when they want to wound without taking responsibility. I tried, for a moment, to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the wine, maybe she hadn't meant it. But then I remembered how Clark hadn't even blinked. No shock, no scolding glance, not even a nervous chuckle to soften the blow. Just silence and that slow, tired shake of his head, as if he'd heard it before. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an isolated remark. This was a sentiment they had already discussed, maybe even entertained. An idea with weight behind it, a plan forming in the shadows. I spent that morning in my study, reviewing papers I hadn't touched in months. I pulled out the insurance documents, 3 policies in total. 1 small burial coverage, 1 life insurance policy I had opened when Jenna was born, and a newer one I had signed after Marjorie passed, encouraged by Jenna herself. "It's just smart planning, Dad," she had said at the time. "It makes sure everything's taken care of, no stress on us, and peace of mind for you." I hadn't thought much of it then. The premiums were manageable, and I wasn't planning on dying any time soon. But now I stared at the numbers and realized what she meant that night. My death would result in a payout of nearly $250,000, enough to cover her mortgage, and then some. Suddenly, her renewed interest in my financial affairs made perfect sense. I kept thinking about the conversation we'd had a few weeks earlier, when she stopped by unexpectedly to check in. She brought groceries, an unusual gesture, and spent the whole visit asking leading questions. How I was sleeping, whether I ever forgot to turn off the stove, if I ever felt dizzy or confused, whether I'd considered hiring someone to help around the house. "We're not saying you're not capable, Dad," she had said sweetly. "It's just safety, you know. The world's not what it used to be." I had shrugged her off at the time, but now it all clicked. That wasn't concern. That was groundwork. I decided not to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I began taking quiet inventory of my life, my vulnerabilities, my risks. I checked the locks on my doors and windows. I reviewed my bank accounts, made sure no one else had access to them, and changed the passwords on all my online portals. I wrote everything down and stored it in the same fireproof box where I kept my will and deeds. I began keeping a journal, documenting each interaction with Jenna, each strange conversation or offhand comment, in case I ever needed to show someone what was happening. I didn't know if I was overreacting, but I knew one thing for sure. If someone was quietly trying to push me out of my own life, I needed to push back, quietly, methodically, and on my own terms. 2 weeks passed. Jenna didn't call, didn't check in. I waited, not because I missed her, but because I knew something was coming. And sure enough, it did. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was pruning the rose bushes out back, Marjorie's pride, though I never had her touch for them, when I heard a car pull up. I walked around to the front and saw Jenna stepping out of her black Lexus, dressed in a tidy grey pantsuit, holding a leather-bound folder in one hand and a coffee in the other. She smiled the way people do when they know they've come with news that can't be refused. "Hi, Dad," she said brightly, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. "I brought some forms I wanted you to look at. Nothing urgent, just some estate planning stuff. You said last year you wanted to get everything in order." I let her in, made us tea, and sat across from her at the kitchen table while she pulled out the papers. There was no small talk this time. She got right to it. "So," she said, flipping open the folder. "Clark and I spoke to a financial advisor. He says it would be smart to put your assets into a living trust, with me as the trustee. That way, if anything ever happens to you, you know, medically, we won't have to go through probate, and everything will be protected. It's just paperwork, Dad. It's really for your own peace of mind." I didn't speak. I took the papers from her and pretended to scan them. They were dense, legal-sounding, full of phrases like successor trustee and power of attorney. I found the sections that mattered. She had positioned herself not just as the beneficiary of my estate, but the sole controller of it in the event I became incapacitated. The criteria for such a determination? Vague. A single physician's evaluation would suffice. You trust me, don't you? She said softly, watching my face. I just want to make sure you're protected. That we're protected. I mean, God forbid you fall and can't call anyone. I don't want the state involved. You deserve better than that. I smiled, nodded, said I'd think about it. She left half an hour later, visibly annoyed that I hadn't signed anything. Just don't wait too long, okay? It's really important. She kissed my cheek again and drove off, tires squealing as she turned the corner. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Marcus Leving, a recommendation from a local veterans group. Middle-aged, efficient, and no nonsense. I brought him the folder, the insurance policies, and a copy of my will. He reviewed everything carefully, then leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that was somewhere between pity and admiration. Mr. Morland, he said, your daughter's trying to gain full control of your assets before your death. If you sign these, she could have you committed with a single doctor's note and take over everything. Bank accounts, property, insurance. It's not illegal, technically, but it's highly manipulative. I thought so, I said. He helped me draft new documents, a revocation of any prior powers of attorney, a revised will placing my estate in a trust controlled by an independent fiduciary, and a clause excluding Jenna from any financial decision-making. I left his office with the papers signed, notarized, and a renewed sense of autonomy. I also left with a question I couldn't shake. How long had this been brewing? That evening I sat down and tried to trace it back. When had Jenna stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as a financial liability? Was it after Marjorie died? Or was it long before, and I had just refused to see it? I remembered the college years, when she'd call home only when she needed money. The way she spoke to Marjorie on the phone, brusque, impatient, always rushing to get off. I remembered the way Clark looked at me. Polite, blank, uninterested. I thought about the holidays when I was expected to show up with gifts, with checks, and then disappear quietly back into my own world. I had given so much and asked for so little, and somehow I had become the obstacle, the problem to be solved. That realization hurt more than I expected. Not because I was surprised, but because I knew it meant that something essential between us had broken long ago, and I had chosen not to see it. I had kept telling myself it was just stress, just life, just the modern world pulling families apart. But it wasn't that. It was contempt. Quiet, slow-growing, deeply rooted. The kind you don't even notice until one day your daughter says, with a laugh and a glass of wine, that you're worth more dead than alive. The next few weeks unfolded with a disturbing consistency, a sense that something invisible was shifting beneath my feet. Jenna didn't press again about the documents, at least not directly, but I could feel the pressure building in smaller, more insidious ways. It started with the unexpected visit from a young woman named Melissa, who showed up at my door one Tuesday morning with a clipboard and a bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. She introduced herself as a home health coordinator, said she'd been sent by a family referral, and wanted to discuss the possibility of arranging in-home care. I stood there, blinking at her, trying to absorb what she was saying. She spoke quickly, fluidly, using phrases like daily wellness checks, fall prevention strategies, and peace of mind for your loved ones. She handed me a brochure, glossy and full of photos of smiling seniors being helped across sunlit porches, and fed soup from polished spoons. I asked her flatly who had referred her. She hesitated, gave a neutral shrug, and said, "It came from your daughter, I believe. Jenna Morland." That name landed in my chest like a hammer. I told her, as politely as I could, that I wasn't interested and that any decisions about my care would be made by me and no one else. She nodded, still smiling, scribbled something on her clipboard, and left without protest. But her presence lingered in the house long after she was gone, like a perfume you didn't ask for and couldn't wash out. That same afternoon, I called Jenna. She didn't answer. I left a message, calm but firm, asking if she had authorized a wellness visit without discussing it with me first. No response. The next day she texted, "Just trying to help, Dad. Don't be so dramatic. You've been forgetful lately, and I thought it wouldn't hurt to get some support in place. Love you." That word, love, felt like an afterthought, a sugarcoating on a bitter pill. I stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone down and stared out the window. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at a squirrel. Inside, I was beginning to understand just how far this was going to go. A few days later, I began receiving phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Some were obviously salespeople, but others were more subtle. One woman claimed to be conducting a senior needs survey on behalf of the county. Another said she was calling about a new Medicare option that might include coverage for in-home evaluations. They were all friendly, efficient, persistent. I asked each of them where they got my number. Most dodged the question. One admitted that it came through a partner referral. It didn't take long to piece it together. Jenna had likely signed me up for some kind of outreach list, possibly even registered me for services under the guise of consent. That, more than anything else, frightened me. Not just the manipulation, but the paperwork, the possibility that someone, somewhere, was creating a paper trail that could later be used to justify action against my will. It made me paranoid. I began locking every door, every night, even the one from the garage into the house. I moved the fireproof box with my documents into a hollowed-out compartment behind the bookshelf in the study. I began writing everything down: dates, names, phone numbers, license plates, anything that seemed strange or out of place. I didn't sleep well. My dreams were filled with rooms I couldn't leave, people who smiled while erasing things from chalkboards I couldn't read. I started keeping a small notebook in my pocket to jot things down as they happened, so no one could claim later that I was confused or misremembering. It sounds extreme now, but at the time, it felt necessary. Survival often does. Then came the pharmacist. Her name was Lydia, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had been filling my prescriptions for years. I stopped in one morning to pick up a refill of my blood pressure medication, and she greeted me with the same gentle warmth as always. But as she handed over the bag, she lowered her voice slightly and leaned forward. "Mr. Morland," she said quietly, "did your doctor change your prescription recently?" I blinked. "No. Why?" She hesitated, then gently turned the prescription label toward me. "This refill is for a different dosage than what you were taking before. It's half the strength, and it's been like that for the last 2 months. I thought it was unusual, but the authorization came through properly." I stared at the bottle, trying to remember if I had noticed any difference. I had felt more sluggish lately, more prone to dizziness when standing too fast. I'd attributed it to age. But now, standing there in the fluorescent light of the pharmacy, I felt a coldness creep down my spine. "Can you tell me who authorized it?" I asked. She shook her head. "It came through your doctor's office, but it was phoned in by a nurse, a new one. I can print the record, if you'd like." I nodded. She handed me a printout, and I saw the name. Melissa Kingsley. The same name as the woman who had shown up on my doorstep weeks earlier. That night, I went through my medication log. Sure enough, the switch had happened about 6 weeks ago. I hadn't noticed the change in dosage because the pills looked nearly identical, and I'd grown so used to the routine. But now I felt sick to my stomach. Someone, acting under the guise of healthcare, had deliberately altered my medication, possibly to make me feel weaker, to increase the impression that I was declining. I called Marcus the next morning and brought him the printout. He listened carefully, then told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to start protecting myself more aggressively. "This is no longer speculation," he said. "This is coordinated. She's laying the groundwork to make the case that you're unfit to manage your affairs, and if you're not proactive, she may succeed." That same day, we filed an official notification with the county registry revoking all previous powers of attorney and submitted a request for a restraining order against any unauthorized third party. Involvement in my medical care. It was a bureaucratic nightmare, but Marcus was patient and thorough. He believed me. That mattered more than I expected. The final blow came in the form of an envelope. It was hand-delivered by courier, with no return address. Inside was a letter from a law firm representing Jenner and Clark. It was written in clinical, professional language, but the meaning was clear. They were seeking to have me evaluated for legal guardianship, citing concerns about cognitive decline, erratic behavior, and poor judgment. The letter listed documented episodes of confusion, failure to adhere to medical recommendations, and concerning statements made in recent conversations. There were no examples, of course, just vague insinuations dressed up in legal jargon. I sat at the kitchen table, holding the letter in both hands, and felt a kind of tremor begin inside me. Not fear, not quite anger, but something older, deeper. A feeling of betrayal so profound it hollowed me out. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, was preparing to declare me unfit to live my life, to manage my money, to inhabit the world as a free man. And not because she believed I was truly incapable, but because she had decided that my autonomy was inconvenient to her plans. That night I wrote a new journal entry in shaking cursive. They're not just circling anymore. They've begun the attack. But I'm still standing. I still remember who I am, and I will not go quietly. 3 weeks after receiving the letter from Jenner's lawyer, I received a notice from the county court. A petition had officially been filed to initiate guardianship proceedings. The hearing was set for 2 months from the delivery date, and in the meantime, I was instructed to attend a preliminary medical evaluation arranged by a third-party clinic. The language of the letter was dry and procedural, but between the lines I could feel the gavel already descending. They weren't waiting to see if I was mentally fit. They had decided I wasn't. Everything else was just paperwork meant to validate the theft. Marcus was furious. He paced in his office as I sat quietly with the envelope in my hands. "This is a power play," he muttered, "and it's not even subtle. They're betting you'll panic, that you'll slip up, or show signs of instability during the evaluation, but we're not going to let that happen." He arranged for me to be independently evaluated by 3 separate specialists before the court-appointed session: a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and a geriatrician. Each one reputable, each one neutral. I met them over the course of 2 weeks, submitted to cognitive tests, memory exercises, and long, often uncomfortable conversations about my habits, moods, and daily functioning. I told them everything, about the pharmacy incident, the altered medications, the unsolicited visits, and the documents Jenner tried to get me to sign. I showed them my journals, my logs, even the recording I had secretly made of the conversation with Melissa when she came to my door. They listened, asked questions, took notes. And in the end, each one gave me a clean bill of mental health. Still, I wasn't at peace. The problem wasn't my mind. It was the fact that I had been maneuvered into having to prove I possessed it. Around this time, I began noticing strange activity around the house. A white sedan parked across the street for several hours each day, sometimes with the engine running, sometimes empty. One morning, I caught a man crouched near my mailbox, holding something metallic in his hand. He jumped when I opened the front door and claimed to be repairing a faulty hinge. I didn't believe him. The day after that, my garbage bin was turned upside down and its contents partially rifled through. Whether it was Jenna, her husband, or someone they had hired, I didn't know. But the message was unmistakable. I was being watched, catalogued, positioned. I stopped going for walks. I closed the curtains. I started sleeping with a chair wedged beneath the doorknob. It sounds paranoid now, even to me, but when you know someone is trying to remove your agency, paranoia is not a disorder. It's a survival skill. And yet, in the middle of this storm, something inside me hardened. It was as if all the years of quiet grief and passive tolerance had finally reached their end point. I no longer cared whether Jenna meant well. I no longer mourned the idea of family I had clung to for so long. I had been a loyal father, a generous one, even after Marjorie passed, even after Jenna began keeping me at a distance. I had forgiven the forgotten birthdays, the unpaid debts, the long silences between visits. But this wasn't just distance. This was erasure. A full-scale attempt to strip me of my identity while I was still breathing. And I would not allow it. So I made a decision. I contacted the insurance company directly and changed the beneficiary of my policies to a small non-profit hospice foundation that had cared for Marjorie during her final months. I updated my will again to explicitly exclude Jenna and Clark from any claim on my estate. I transferred a portion of my savings to a newly opened private account under a pseudonym, with Marcus as legal trustee. Then I called a realtor I had known years ago through one of Marjorie's garden clubs and asked for a private appraisal of my property. Within 10 days, I had accepted a cash offer. The house would close within 30. I packed only what mattered: Marjorie's letters, a few family photos, the journals, my clothes, and the legal files. Everything else I sold, donated, or left behind. I moved into a modest furnished rental in a neighboring county, using a different name on the mailbox and setting up a P.O. box for correspondence. I changed my phone number, deactivated my old email, and gave Marcus full authority to represent me in all court matters. My only instruction to him was this: don't just defend me. Win. When Jenna called my old number and found it disconnected, I can only imagine the confusion. When she arrived at the house days later and saw it empty, the blinds drawn, the furniture gone, I hope there was a moment of silence in her chest, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I wanted her to understand that I wasn't just a name on a policy or a legal problem to be solved. I was still here, still thinking, still deciding, still free. That was the middle of everything. Not the end, not even the true beginning, but the point where the story changed direction, and so did I. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to the loss of my family. I was reclaiming what was left of my life from the people who had quietly decided it was already over. The relocation brought an eerie sort of calm at first, like the eye of a hurricane that had yet to complete its arc. In my new rental, a small 2-bedroom duplex near the edge of Stark County, I found myself for the first time in months without immediate threats looming over me. No unmarked cars outside. No visits from mysterious care coordinators. No legal notices arriving at the door like silent grenades. The furniture was plain but comfortable, the neighborhood quiet, and I had enough money tucked away to last more than comfortably. I began rising later, allowing myself the small luxury of sleeping past dawn, sipping coffee on the patio in a sweater that Marjorie had knit during her last winter. I read more, wrote more, even allowed myself moments of reflection, but none of it brought peace. Not real peace. Because I knew the storm wasn't over, it had simply changed direction. Marcus continued handling everything related to the guardianship case. He was tireless, composed, and methodical. Every day, he emailed me updates, sometimes multiple times, as Jenna's legal team began to escalate their efforts. What had begun as a cautious petition had now transformed into something sharper, more aggressive. They claimed abandonment, citing my sudden disappearance as evidence of cognitive instability. They presented a sworn affidavit from Jenna's friend, a family therapist, who alleged that Jenna had shared deep concerns about my behavior for over a year. They compiled excerpts from voicemails I had left in frustration months earlier, taken out of context and transcribed in ways that made me sound frantic, erratic, disoriented. They submitted copies of the pharmacy's prescription adjustments, conveniently ignoring the fact that those changes had been initiated under Jenna's influence, not mine. There were references to financial recklessness, citing the recent sale of my home and the transfer of assets into trust, both perfectly legal, but now weaponized as evidence of declining judgment. Then came the most egregious blow, a new psychiatric evaluation commissioned by their side. It was a report from a Dr. Carl Rudman, a clinical psychologist who had never met me. The document, 12 pages long, concluded that based on second-hand reports and behavioral patterns described by the family, I exhibited signs consistent with early-stage dementia and possible narcissistic personality disorder. It was a character assassination cloaked in clinical terms. Marcus was livid. He filed a motion to have the report struck from the record and demanded that any evaluations must involve direct assessment, not speculative testimony based on family anecdotes. The judge, a weary-looking woman with little patience for theatrics, granted the motion, but not without a warning. If I failed to appear for the upcoming hearing, she would consider Jenna's petition uncontested. That meant that even if everything was fabricated, even if I were in perfect health, the legal system could still strip me of my autonomy by default. And so, I prepared for the hearing. It was scheduled for the first Monday in April at the county courthouse. Marcus insisted I appear calm, collected, and above all, unprovoked. "Do not let them bait you," he said. "They want you angry. They want you to seem irrational. That's their play. Don't give them the performance they're hoping for." I promised him I wouldn't. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already rehearsed that scene 100 times in my mind. Every word, every glance, every betrayal laid bare beneath fluorescent courtroom lights. I wasn't going there to perform. I was going to survive. The courtroom was small and windowless, beige walls and dull lighting that cast everyone in the same fatigued hue. Jenna was already seated at the front with Clark by her side, their lawyer whispering into her ear like a parasite feeding from its host. She didn't look at me when I entered. I did not look away. Her hair was straighter than usual, her suit crisp, her expression neutral. No joy, no regret. Just the taut posture of someone preparing for business. Clark avoided my gaze entirely. His hands remained folded in his lap like a boy at confession. When the judge entered, we all stood. When she asked the room to proceed, it began. Jenna's lawyer opened with a plea for compassion. He painted a picture of a worried daughter, trying her best to protect her aging father, only to be met with resistance, paranoia, and increasingly erratic decisions. He spoke of financial vulnerabilities, cognitive inconsistencies, and a tragic breakdown in family trust. Jenna dabbed her eye once with a tissue. Whether the tear was real or practiced, I couldn't say. Then Marcus stood, and in his calm and even tone, dismantled everything that had been said. He submitted the 3 independent evaluations attesting to my mental clarity. He referenced my legally sound sale of the house, the protection of my estate through proper legal channels, and the repeated patterns of manipulation leading up to Jenna's guardianship petition. He ended with a quiet but firm sentence. "This is not about love or concern, this is about control. And Mr. Morland does not require a guardian. He requires freedom." The judge listened. She asked questions. Then she turned to me. Mr. Morland, she said, do you understand the nature of these proceedings? I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I understand that my daughter believes I no longer have the right to make decisions about my own life. And do you believe you're capable of doing so? I looked directly at Jenna when I spoke. Yes, I've been capable my entire life. I raised a daughter, buried a wife, paid every bill, filed every tax return, and wrote every check for every request my daughter ever made, without question, without hesitation. And when I finally began to say no, suddenly I became unwell. If being clear-eyed about betrayal is a symptom of decline, then maybe I am declining. But I know who I am. I know what I've lived through. And I will not be erased by the people I once trusted most. The courtroom was silent. Even Clark looked at me now, his face unreadable. Jenna stared down at her lap. The judge recessed for an hour to deliberate. Marcus and I waited in a nearby conference room, drinking lukewarm coffee and speaking very little. When we returned, the judge read her decision. I find no evidence of cognitive impairment. The respondent has demonstrated full understanding of the proceedings, and his financial decisions appear sound and legally appropriate. The petition for guardianship is denied. I felt the breath leave my body. Not relief, because there would be no full relief from what had been done, but a release nonetheless, a loosening of the grip around my neck. Jenna remained motionless. Clark put a hand on her arm, but she didn't respond. Her lawyer leaned in to say something, but she waved him off. The judge banged the gavel. It was done. Or so I thought. 2 days later, I received a message from Marcus. They're appealing, he said flatly. Not the guardianship ruling, something else. They've filed a claim challenging your last change to the insurance beneficiary. They're asserting undue influence and financial instability, attempting to freeze the payout if something happens to you. I laughed, not with humor, but with disbelief. They had lost in court, failed to take my mind or my estate, and now they were planning ahead for my death, trying to block the only thing I had managed to redirect away from them. But I wasn't surprised. The depth of entitlement ran that deep. They believed I owed them everything, my patience, my money, my legacy, even my death. Marcus began preparing the defense immediately. We documented the timeline of every insurance change, every lawyer-reviewed signature, every witness. It would take time, but he was confident we'd prevail. This is desperation, he said. They're throwing whatever they can in the air to see what sticks. But we're ahead of them now. They didn't expect you to fight, and now they don't know how to stop. He was right. They didn't. But I had already stopped them in the only way that mattered. I had reclaimed myself, my life, my name. I didn't write to Jenna. I didn't return Clark's half-hearted voicemail a week later. I simply moved forward, quietly, with purpose. The storm hadn't passed, but I had walked out of its core intact. That was more than most could say. That was everything. A week after Marcus informed me of the appeal, I stopped answering my phone entirely. The calls weren't frequent, but the names that appeared on the screen, Jenna, Clark, or a local number I suspected belonged to their new attorney, were enough to sour my stomach. I turned the ringer off, tucked the phone in a drawer, and decided that whatever they had to say, they had already said it in the clearest language possible. Litigation, accusation, dispossession. I'd spent enough years chasing scraps of affection, pretending distance was just stress, just busy lives. I was done listening to lies dressed as concern. And so I began to withdraw, not in weakness but with quiet precision. I scrubbed my digital presence, closed my old email, shut down my social accounts that I barely used. I told Marcus he was the only person allowed to represent me to the outside world. And then, without warning, Jenna showed up in person. It was early afternoon, the sun still high enough to cast clear shadows, when I heard the knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My neighbour, an older gentleman named Al, usually came through the back gate when we shared coffee, and deliveries always dropped off packages by the stoop without fanfare. This knock was deliberate. Sharp, like a police officer's. I stood in the hallway for a moment, unseen from the door, listening. Another knock. Then a voice. "Dad, it's me." The voice was unmistakable. Jenna. I froze. It had been months since I had seen her in person. I should have known she would come eventually, that the paper trail and unanswered calls would no longer suffice. Still, I hadn't expected it to be so soon, or so bold. I opened the door a crack and peered out. She stood there in flats and jeans, a soft cardigan over a white blouse, holding nothing but her phone. No folder, no lawyer, no husband. Her face looked thinner, drawn, eyes red. For a moment, I felt the ghost of worry try to rise inside me, but I suppressed it. Concern was her currency. I wouldn't be spending any more of it. "I don't want to talk to you," I said quietly. "Please." She whispered. 5 minutes. That's all? Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider and let her in. She stepped into the living room, glancing around as if cataloguing the space, her gaze briefly resting on the box of old letters I'd left on the coffee table. She sat without asking, folded her hands in her lap, and stared down at them like a child preparing to recite a rehearsed confession. "I know you hate me," she said after a long silence. I said nothing. "I deserve it," she continued. I got caught up. Clark got in my head. We both thought—" She stopped, exhaled. "We were afraid. You were disappearing from us. We didn't know what to do." I looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time I saw the cracks. Her polished veneer was gone. She looked tired. Not cosmetically, but spiritually, like someone who had bet on something terrible and lost. "You didn't lose me," I said at last. "You threw me away." She winced, nodded. "I know, I do, and I wish I could take it back. But I can't. So I came here to tell you something. I withdrew the appeal. On the insurance. It's done." I blinked. I hadn't expected that. Not so soon. "I told Clark I couldn't keep going like this," she said. "We argued. A lot. He said I was giving up, that I was weak. I told him I was done trying to squeeze money out of someone who raised me, clothed me, gave me everything, and only asked to be left in peace. I told him I didn't want to be the kind of person who'd fight their own father in court over what he'd leave behind after he died." I studied her face. There was pain there. Maybe genuine. Maybe the beginning of something like remorse. But I didn't trust it. Not yet. It was too easy to say sorry after the weapons had been drawn and the damage inflicted. Too easy to show up when the war you started begins to bleed you too. "You didn't just file papers," I said evenly. "You tried to erase me. You told strangers I was incompetent. You rewrote my medical records. You manipulated doctors. You called me worth more dead than alive." Her mouth opened, then closed. She nodded slowly. "I know. And I hate myself for it." There it was again, that soft, shapeless plea for redemption. But it wasn't hers to ask for. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "What do you want, Jenna?" I asked, not unkindly. She took a long breath. "I want to say goodbye, for now at least. I know I can't undo anything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I wanted you to hear it. From me." I stood still. I didn't move toward her. I didn't offer comfort. I simply nodded once and walked to the door. She understood. She rose, walked past me without speaking, and paused only when her hand touched the knob. "I think about Mom a lot these days," she said, her back still to me. "She'd be ashamed of me, but she'd also tell you not to stay bitter. She hated when you did that." I didn't respond. She opened the door and left. I stood there for a long time, listening to the receding sound of her footsteps, until the street went quiet again. That evening, Marcus called. "Just wanted to let you know, Jenna's attorney confirmed they've filed the withdrawal. The insurance is fully under your foundation's name now. No more obstacles. It's done." I thanked him. I didn't mention the visit. I didn't need to. That night, for the first time in months, I slept through until morning without waking once. In the months that followed Jenna's visit, my life settled into something close to stillness. Not peace, exactly, but a kind of functional quiet, the sort that allows you to finally hear the slow workings of your own heart without distraction. The legal threats dissolved. Marcus closed the last of the filings, and the non-profit officially received the insurance transfer documentation with no further contest. I stopped checking the mailbox with dread, stopped glancing over my shoulder when walking to the grocery store, stopped bracing myself for betrayal. It was over. Not forgiven. Not forgotten. But over. I didn't hear from Jenna again. Not directly. Once, a letter arrived without a return address, but I recognized her handwriting instantly. It was short. She thanked me for listening. She said she hoped I was well. She enclosed a photo of Owen, my grandson, standing beside his new wife outside a small chapel somewhere I didn't recognize. He looked happy, healthy, a man with a future. I placed the letter in a drawer and left it there. I wasn't angry. Just finished. That's a strange thing to say about one's only child. But some endings come not with fire, but with the quiet extinguishing of hope. I sold the second house after a year and used the money to lease a small cabin near Mohican State Park. It's just remote enough to keep most visitors away, but close enough that I can still drive into town for groceries and books. I started attending a weekly reading group at the local library, mostly retired folks like me, and sometimes I speak. Nothing grand, just memories, observations. I never mention the court case, never talk about Jenna, but sometimes, when others speak of family, of children and holidays and what gets left behind, I offer a phrase I've come to live by. Sometimes survival means knowing when to stop reaching. I've also started writing again. Real writing. Not just journals and notes and legal records, but stories, snapshots of a life once full of noise and closeness and the illusion of permanence. I don't paint myself as a hero. I wasn't a perfect husband or father. I could be stern and proud and too quick to retreat when things hurt. But I was steady. I showed up. And I stayed. That should have counted for something. It didn't, in the end. But now I write, because I want it to matter to someone, even if that someone is just the man I see in the mirror each morning. Sometimes I think about Marjorie, not as she was in the hospital, thin and fading, but years earlier, sitting on the back porch, trimming basil with the sun in her hair. She had a way of humming when she worked, a quiet, tuneless melody that always let me know where she was in the house. I still hear it sometimes. Faint, like memory made audible. She would have known what to do, I think. Or maybe she would have just held my hand and said, "Do what you must, but don't become them." I haven't. I've stayed on my side of the line. I didn't retaliate. I didn't drag Jenna's name through the mud, didn't fight for revenge or restitution. I simply took back my name, my mind, and the remainder of my time. That's all I ever wanted. And in the end, that was more than enough.